Okay, don't tell anybody, but I think this is one of my favorite conversion stories that I've had on this show. It's fantastic. My guest is a gentleman called Timothy Ezat. He was nominally a Muslim, grew up in Kurdistan in Iraq, then nominally an atheist, and then at the age of 15 became radically converted to Evangelical Christianity in a time that was in a time and place, it was very, very dangerous to be an evangelical Christian in this kind of underground church. And gosh, his journey into the Catholic faith is incredible. I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but I'll put it this way. From there, he looked into the roots of the Christian faith and became an Anglican priest, looking for this more rooted traditional Christianity from the time of the Bible. Spent some time there, but was pushing for something deeper, and saw some of these fractures in the Anglican Church and how he was having to hold together his congregations from this fighting, this pull between these very very modern Anglican wing of the church and the traditional Anglican wing of the church, and as we discussed, it ends up being kind of a Protestant microcosm in the Anglican Church, and that was not what he was looking for, not what he saw in the early church fathers and in the fathers of the faith in Christianity. And so he becomes Catholic. It's a fantastic story. You're going to absolutely love this and eat it up. Journey into why would somebody become Christian in the first place, become an Anglican priest, and what forces a person to dig deeper and wind up in that trajectory becoming Catholic. It's a fantastic conversation. You will love it. I am so excited to bring it to you for you guys this week. If you like these kind of videos, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/cordialcatholic to support this show and the work we do here to keep this thing going and growing every single week. And please do subscribe to this channel and like this video and tell some friends to help keep this thing growing, guys. You are going to love this episode. Gosh, one of my very favorites, Timothy Ezat. It's incredible. Please enjoy. Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you are listening to this on podcast, we're also available on YouTube at youtube.com/thecordialcatholic. If you're watching us on YouTube, thank you. You can also just listen audio only on podcasts, everywhere you find podcasts as well. You can just listen if you don't want to see us anymore, or want to go somewhere, or want to commute and listen to us as you go. Fantastic episode for you today. I am joined by Timothy Ezat. He was born in Kurdistan in Iraq, a nominal Muslim, then a nominal atheist. At the age of 15, he converted to Evangelical Christianity, just like me. He worked for 2 years in London as a missionary and then began training for the ordination in the Anglican orders in 2009. As an Anglican deacon and then priest, he served in Eastbourne in the southeast end of London and did an MA in Christian theology with a dissertation on Cyril of Alexandria while he was there. In 2020, he was received into the Catholic Church through the Ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham. Many guests in this program have gone that similar route. Timothy, so pleased to have you here on the show today. Welcome and hello.
Thank you, Keith. It's great to be here, and thank you for the opportunity.
This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to talk to you. I've been excited for a while to talk to you. I don't know how I first met you or encountered you, but I've been following you on Twitter for a while, and your journey, it's been exciting. And I think kind of the crazy thing is, if I spoke to you a little while earlier, I would have called you Father as an Anglican priest. I think if we spoil this discussion a little bit, if I were to speak to you perhaps in the future, a little bit from now, I would also be calling you Father for different reasons, potentially. So, fantastic journey you've been on. I want to kind of get out of the way and let you tell us a bit about how it began. I mentioned you were nominal Muslim, then nominal atheist, and like me, became Christian at kind of the exact same age, evangelical. Let's begin at the beginning. Tell us a bit about how your faith journey or your journey towards faith began for you.
Sure. Well, thank you once again for having me and for the opportunity. Well, as you said, I'm Kurdish from north of Iraq. I think many people know of the Kurds, and I was born there to a nominal Muslim family. By nominal, I mean, my small family practice Islam on and off, but I wasn't a practitioner of Islam. I didn't really practice the religion. I did believe that there is God and all that, but didn't really quite keep it on a day-to-day basis. And so, growing up in a small family, that was me, my two sisters, mom and dad, and again, those of you or most people will know of Iraq and Middle East. There's always been war and terrible things happening. Iraq went through the Kuwait War, and in 1991 there was a Kurdish uprising and revolution in which I lost my father, and the civil war broke out, and it was a terrible time. Lots of people died, and lots of suffering, and I happen to also have a few members of my family who were atheists. And I remember them, especially one of my uncles in particular, speaking to me about that there is no God and this is all nonsense and things like that. And he started to kind of challenge, the whole thing that, well, where is God from all the suffering around us? And, if he's there, why he's not doing something about it? And the idea seemed attractive, and particularly because I wasn't a practicing Muslim, I haven't really given much thought to Islam. I just thought, well, that's probably true. I can't see God in the middle of this suffering. I can't see God from what's happening in our lives. And my uncle's sort of advice was like, life is short. As much as possible, try and enjoy it because you never know when you're going to die, and forget about everything else and just sort of try and enjoy life. And that's the advice I kind of took on. And I remember I was very young. I was like age of sort of 13, 14, kind of a time. And again, I call myself a nominal atheist. I didn't go through the sort of the Richard Dawkins studies and and reasoning. I kind of just took my uncle's word for it. However, in December 1996, that was a long time ago now. December 1996, I saw what's known as a Jesus film, which was broadcasted in our local TV station. Actually, it was Christmas. It was Christmas Eve. We have a small Christian community in Iraq. In my city, in particular, we have Chaldeans, which are one of the sort of early Christian communities. And I think, as a mark of respect, the TV station sort of thought, "How do we mark Christmas? We're going to put Jesus film on," which is quite crazy and miraculous in many ways. So I kind of glued up to the TV, watching a film about the life of the Messiah. Now, what really intrigued me about that is that I knew, from in Muslim sort of religion and culture, is that a depiction of a prophet is forbidden. So you see a movie or two there are about the history of Islam. You never see Muhammad. You always see a shadow of him or something like that. So I was intrigued to see whether they're going to depict Jesus in the film. And lo and behold, they did. They depicted Jesus. And I was just sort of glued to the TV screen and just watching and watching. And at the end of the film, when the film finished and showed the resurrection and all that, they kind of showed little images from the film. And there was a voiceover talking about, the great leaders, religious and otherwise, have come and gone, but Jesus Christ is alive today, and he can come into your life should you ask him to. And I kind of, in disbelief, just thought like, this is ridiculous. How could he come into my life, dead for 2,000 years? And I did. So I then suggested that there would be a prayer, and I could say that prayer, repeated afterwards. So I thought, I'm not going to lose anything. I could say that prayer, and I did say, ask Jesus to come into my life. Of course, not believing that such a thing is possible, but I thought I'm not losing anything anyways. But lo and behold, Jesus took me seriously for my prayer, and so the thing that happened after the film is that I had a great curiosity about who this Jesus is, and the fact that he was crucified, and the claim about his resurrection, and loving your enemy, and this kind of stuff. I just wanted to find out more about him. The obvious thing was for me to go and get my hand on an Injil. In Arabic, they call the New Testament Injil, because I know the Christians have a book called the Injil. So I thought I'll go and get myself an Injil and start reading about it. And I went to the market, and I got myself a secondhand New Testament, and I started reading through it for some good 10 months. And I kind of read, through Matthew, Mark, and I sort of felt, oh yeah, the stories are starting to repeat themselves, and then I started reading the epistles of St. Paul, and I was getting a bit sort of amazed at Paul saying pray all the time. And I was thinking, so how do you pray? What do you do to pray? I mean, I was ready to pray, but how do you do it? Because again, coming from a Muslim culture, I thought there must be some rituals, there must be some times in which I could, pray and do things. But I couldn't find anything like this in the New Testament. And so I started to speak to people about about Christianity, and people kind of got to know that I'm reading the New Testament, and there's an interest. I'm growing an interest about it. And whilst at school, there was a guy whom I heard of, a guy who became a Christian, and I thought, well, that sounds like the guy I want to talk to. And I did go and I speak to this guy, introduced myself. I said, I heard you become a Christian, and I really have some questions. I wonder if you could help me. And he said, well, you know what? I sort of kind of became a Christian like about a week or so ago. So I haven't really got. I'm not sure if I could have answers, but I know I could take you somewhere that it could help you. Okay, and that place happened to be, sort of on the same road as where my school was. It was just a sort of a normal house run by NGOs, Western NGOs, and he took me there, and there were a number of other people, Kurds, actually, all of them were Kurds, and he introduced me to them, and they said, well, these guys are all Christians, and soon I found out they all were been Muslim and been converted. And then I met with one of them. He started giving the story of Adam and Eve and the fall and things like this, and I kind of thought to myself, said, well, I really like to meet real Christians. I was like, well, what does that mean? So, well, I like people who've been born Christians, I mean, no disrespect, but, you guys are all converts. So I really want to meet some real Christians. And so they said, well, okay, I mean, the church is down the road, you go there and speak to them. Unfortunately, that never happened. I always kind of walked around the church, which is a Catholic Chaldean church. The door was always sort of shut, and I could never manage to get in. And I never really, I had some Christian friends who were, Chaldean Christians, but they were so afraid to talk about these things. So I never managed to have a conversation with them. So I came back to the little sort of underground church, and I said, okay, well, tell me more about Christianity. And the chap explained more, and then he said, would you like to pray? I said, well, I'd love to, but I don't know how to pray. So I said, well, it's easy. First, I'm going to say something, and if you agree with it, then say it after me, which was simply asking Jesus to forgive my sins and asking him to come into my life and take over. And I must say, once I said that prayer, I felt an enormous amount of joy. I thought, like, there's something has happened. I didn't know what it is, but I was full of joy. People could see it on street, like this guy's just sort of whooping about, and what's wrong with him. And I couldn't make sense of it myself, but I just went along with it. And of course, to cut a long story short, soon my family found out, and that was a big deal. And though my family, as I said, they weren't particularly religious, but somehow that was seen as a mark of, it's something you don't do. It's something that's not right. Society won't accept. And soon my mom said that she's received threatening phone calls from Islamists and things like that, something that I'm not sure if it was true or was merely manufactured to deter me from going to church. But at that time, it was all very real to me. And at home, they didn't speak to me. They kind of all shunned me. I was home, but they shunned me. There was a threat of just denying me as a son. And I felt the pressure at some point. I felt an enormous pressure that this is not, this is making everyone very unhappy. And I remember telling the chap who kind of helped me to pray. I said, "Look, I don't think I'll come to church anymore. I think this is causing my family lots of trouble." And I went to my mom and I said, "Look, mom, if my Christianity is sort of making you sad, then okay, I'm going to stop being a Christian." And the moment I said that, I felt an enormous sadness in my heart. I felt there is something wrong, that I did something wrong, something wasn't right. I mean, to the point that I was in the brink of crying. There is something I knew something is not right, uh, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Then I called that chap in the church on the phone, and I told him what happened. And then he said to me, he said, "Timothy, here's the thing: is that there was at Holy Week there was Peter and there was Judas. One denied him and one betrayed him. One decided to die away from him and one returned to him. Which one do you want to be?" And that was sort of very it was very poignant, and I said, "Well, I guess I want to be Peter." He said, "Well, then never deny him again, because if you do, he will deny you." And I think that was sort of a turning point. That's it. There's no going back now. I'm a Christian, and people need to accept that. So my family then thought, me being a teenager and all that, I'm being influenced by older people and all the rest of this. And because of the civil war in the region, there was the idea of us immigrating to a safer part of the world. So a year from my conversion, we came and settled in England, in London. And then, as time went by, I suppose my mom started to accept more and more, like, well, my son has become a Christian. He has that freedom, and he's not in danger anymore. So let him be, if you like. So that was sort of how I became a Christian. But I suppose the other thing next to that was, when I was a new Christian, someone gave me an audio tape. If you remember them, the cassette tapes, you sort of put them in and all this. And there was a testimony of an Egyptian guy who was also from a Muslim background, became a Christian. And I listened to it, and he mentioned, he was asked, "So what are you going to do next?" And he said, "Well, I'm hoping to kind of do some kind of do a Bible study or go into Bible college." And I thought, "Oh, that's interesting. What's Bible college? What's theological college?" And I asked the guys in the underground community, and they said, "Oh, yeah, that's where people want to be sort of ministers and things like that. They go and do something called theological college." And I also find out that such thing doesn't exist in Iraq. So, but that kind of started to become a dream of mine. Like, oh, I want to go to a Bible college. I want to go and learn more about my faith. But coupled with that, there was something that's important that I think ultimately led me to the Catholic Church, was the thought that the aftermath of the apostles, the period immediately after the apostles, is important to Christianity, to how Christianity was shaped and became what it is. I mean, at least that, I understood that much about Islam. So, for example, in Islam, you're reading the Quran to pray. Once again, the Quran doesn't tell you how to pray. You have to go to the tradition to learn how to pray and when to pray and things like that. So without the tradition, the Quran doesn't make much sense. You know that there's the command of praying, but how do I pray? The answer lies somewhere else. So for me, I kind of had a similar understanding. I was thinking like, well, surely the period after the New Testament, after the apostles, it's important because that's, if you like, how Christianity sort of came into into existence. It sort of it was no longer just a primitive sort of a thing, just house churches, but trying to become a religion as we know it. So I went to Bible college here in London with the view and hope that I will learn about the post New Testament era. It was a Pentecostal Bible college, and you won't be surprised that there was no mention of,
Yeah.
the post-apostolic church. It was more about, things that was happening in America, kind of a thing, than about, Antioch and Alexandria and Rome and things like that. And so I kind of came out of that saddened that it didn't actually give me what I hoped for, but at the same time opened my eyes as to, I started to look for a more rooted Christianity that whatever's happening here is all very new in Christian history, and I looked for something that's rooted in history. Where do I go for that? And obviously, I then became a missionary for an organization called London City Mission, and they were more on the sort of conservative evangelical side, and they were more sort of grounded and trying to be biblical and all that. And I learned a great deal from them. But again, it was sort of on the free church side, not much attention to what happened before Luther, and my search continued. And almost by, well, but by accident, that surely is the case, that I came across the Anglican Church. And once I did that, the question of, before becoming an Anglican, the question of becoming an Anglican priest sort of was raised. So it was a bit crazy. Like, I wasn't even an Anglican, but that question kind of came into the point. So I just grabbed it. I thought, this will give me an opportunity to learn about the church, and well, as I came close to the Anglican Church, I learned that, they have holy orders and they have liturgy, and there is a sense of a capturing of the early church and all that. So kind of that gave me enough curiosity to pursue ordination in the Anglican Church. And of course, I went through lots of sort of interviews and meetings and learning about the Anglican Church, which was all very great, and I'm very grateful for when I look back. It was a very formative time in my life. And I was then recommended to be trained as a priest in Oxford. And of course, I think by now yourself and your listeners will know that the Anglican Church is a bit of a strange animal in many ways. It has sort of the evangelicals of all sorts, and in the same time, it has Catholics who might think of themselves more Catholic than the Pope. So you kind of have the two, and also everything in between. Now in England, that's certainly the case. I know in America and Canada, they might sound to be more kind of on the sacramental side of things, but certainly in England, it will have a great variety of the whole. You could say the whole variety of Christianity exists in it. And so the college I went to was, evangelical, and the emphasis was on the Puritans, on again evangelicalism as it was understood in England and in America. And there was very little by the way of the fathers. There was something, but it was more like a window shopping of the fathers, and also of Anglicanism itself. It didn't actually have much about Anglicanism itself. It felt like you're being trained to become a Baptist minister, but only the name is Anglican, sort of a thing. That's how it felt to me. However, the important thing was for me, and what was really helpful, is that when you were in Oxford, you were not bound by the college. You could really be anywhere, attend anything, and the doors are open for you. And that was the first time I remember going to what's called schools, where different lecturers from Oxford come and lecture. There was this lecturer talking about Justin Martyr. I thought, like, that sounds like the sort of person I want to read. And I got my hand on Justin Martyr and started reading about the fathers. Started to read Justin Martyr, and then getting myself into Irenaeus a little bit. And then my whole view of how I see the church and how I see Christianity started to be challenged. And remember, I was receptive to all these things because I was looking for, to my mind, how, what happened after the apostles. There's a progression of how Christianity came about. So whatever that gives me, I'm going to hold on to it. And then I'll try and sort of be true to that. And of course, as you begin to read the fathers, you find that actually there is a higher view of the Eucharist than the given both evangelical and I would say Anglican view to some extent. and that the Eucharist was central to the life of the church. People were gathering for the Eucharist. There's a description of it in Justin Martyr as to what the church was doing, and you see it in Ignatius of Antioch. There's a huge emphasis on the Eucharist and on the bishop and on the deacon and the presbyters, and these things. It was definitely in conflict with my college teaching and obviously the evangelical views that I have had. I think more importantly, kind of new Anglicanism has something of that, but I suppose what was even more revolutionary for me at that stage is that the New Testament itself as scripture came about in the bosom of that church that had bishops, and it was gathering around the Eucharist. And it wasn't just like, here's a book, again, like Islam, just drop down from heaven and saying, there you are, that's your book, off you go now, kind of a thing. And so therefore there was tradition. There is the word tradition is mentioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 when Paul says, I hand over to you what was handed over to me. So I don't think it works in English, but it's like saying it was it was tradition to me what I tradition to you. And he says that about the Eucharist and about Jesus' sort of basic, if you like, the beginnings of the creed, that Christ will be born and he will die, he will be raised. And so that kind of was the skeleton, that was the measurement, that was the tradition through which New Testament was put together and kind of collected, as a book and testimony. Of course, I'm simplifying, and having delved into some of the fathers deeply, I know patristic scholars saying, "Well, you're making it so simple." I know, but this is a podcast, and I'm just trying to kind of give you a skeleton of these things, sort of a brief description. So I suppose scripture interpretation became a big deal, and I remember in my college, it was the emphasis was, in Old Testament lecture, the lecturer came in, and she put the word Jesus on the blackboard, and she put a cross over it and said, "There is no J word in this class." Right, and I was thinking, right, okay, that's a big deal, and that became sort of something stayed with me. No. The question is that Christianity has claimed that the Old Testament is a Christian book. It's a book of the church. So how do I read it like Jesus did? How do I read it like the apostles did? How do I read it like the fathers did? And that really became the great passion of mine, sort of, how do the fathers read the scriptures? That sort of, it became the question I came out, kept me busy for, up to now, I suppose. So in the light of the Eucharist, the way the New Testament was put together, you find that Old Testament was also the church's scripture, and it has to be read within the church to be understood the Christian way. And I think from Irenaeus I kind of learned, you could read the scriptures in any way you like. I mean, he has this beautiful image of what the heretics do, that he says, like, the scriptures is like an image of a king, a mosaic of a king. The heretics come and smash it, and they rearrange it, and they make a fox or a dog out of it, and they say this is what it's supposed to be. But actually, scriptures will give you a picture of the King Christ. And therefore he says, well, you can read it any way you like, but if you want to read it with the church, this is the way you need to read it. It has to be this way. There aren't any other ways. It's this way that you have to read it if you are to be true to the church. So that was an important principle that I kind of got from Irenaeus. I suppose the other thing that I also got from Irenaeus is the fact that, again, he's saying, so this is not about me and my understanding and what's my ultimate judgment about something, but this is what the church says. And if you want to belong to the church, so there's this sort of, you need to humble yourself and accept that, Christians have come before me and have read the scriptures for over 2,000 years, and this is the church's way of understanding it and refining it and getting it to this point. So who am I in the year 2021 to say, well, I know better than the church? So that was another important factor, that this is not about, I'm not studying theology anymore so I could make my judgment about things, but rather I've already accepted what the church says, and I'm simply rejoicing in that and trying to understand it and understand the deep mysteries that has brought to me, rather than thinking that I'm going to have to come up with new things. So that's sort of the college period, but that opened my eyes, and I sort of thought, right, I'm no longer an evangelical now. The trouble is that college was very evangelical, and I came to an for what's known as curacy. When I finished college and graduated, and then I got ordained as a deacon, I came to an evangelical Anglican church. Now, in my mind, I thought college was not being honest to what the Anglican church looks like. So the evangelical Anglicans will be more respectful of holy orders, of the sacraments and things like that. But once I landed in my curacy as a deacon and then a trainee priest, I sort of realized that my training incumbent, who was the senior priest, he didn't really believe that, well, unlike Anglicans and unlike the Book of Common Prayer, he didn't really believe that baptism causes regeneration. He didn't have much by way of, sort of liturgy. He didn't care much about that. It was more like a free church. And I think we both kind of came to the conclusion that we are saying different things, and this is not going to work. And I'm really grateful to him, because we are great friends, and actually our relationship has worked better since we we kind of knew where each stands. But then I kind of took that to sort of the diocese and said, well, I think I'm more on the Anglo-Catholic sort of line of things, and this is not working for me. So they kind of transferred me to another church in the same town in Eastbourne, which is actually, by the way, it's south of England rather than south of London. It's on the coast, and that was St Mary's Old Town in Eastbourne. Is in the High Anglican tradition. That was a wonderful period for me, because there I kind of was kind of released to read people from the Oxford movement, read more of the fathers. There was daily Eucharistic celebration, adoration, and in many ways very Catholic, if you like. And by the time I finished my training, which was about 4 years, both churches together, I subscribed fully to the traditional Anglo-Catholicism line of the Church of England. I believe that we're the heir of the Oxford movement, and Keble and Pusey and all these great guys. We are their children. And then I became an incumbent, which means I had a church I was put in charge of a church, so I had my own church to look after. Again, in the same town, a wonderful church, wonderful people. But soon it became clear as time went on that what I have started to appreciate about the patristic tradition, what I have started to appreciate about the priesthood, my view of the priesthood was changing all the time, becoming more sacramental. What I have come to believe about the church as a vehicle of salvation, these things can't really be sustained in the Anglican Church and tradition. So I started to kind of struggle and not be happy with what I have become, and also what I was doing in the church. So somehow it felt like I'm being dishonest, with them. And obviously, the Church of England was, whatever it has believed, it was moving on from it all the time. There's a sort of a fast movement in all circles. And I think perhaps some of my Anglican friends and colleagues, former colleagues, if they listen to this, they'll be thinking, well, but that's not, they have a different view of the Church of England than I hold now. And I think for me, the trouble was that I came to the conclusion. I did say to a friend of mine who said, why are you becoming a Catholic? I said, okay, how many things can I say about the Anglican Church in terms of belief and practice? How many things can I say about it? And you would say, yes, but no. Like there's going to be a disagreement about it. No matter what I say, there will be very few things that we can agree on. The vast majority of things we will disagree about, because there are, so many views, and they all are Anglican and they are all there. So I can never really claim with confidence saying this is what we Anglicans believe about X, Y, or Z. And I can't live with that tension all the time. My people in church, they don't have the same view of what's Christianity, what's the church, what's the point of this, what's the point of that. And there's always tension and happiness on Sunday services, because people have different views as to what a Sunday service should look like. And I call it service because that's how it's viewed. Something it should be a high mass, something should be, just sort of some kind of a school assembly or something like this. So I came to the point thinking this is not working, and my views have changed greatly about Anglicanism. And if I'm honest to myself, my views are more true to the Catholic Church than they are to the Anglican Church. But I was trying to resist it and argue myself out. And then came, I think it was New Year, which is a funny thing, New Year 2018. And we were in Edinburgh with my wife. And I never do New Year resolution. I don't kind of really do this kind of things. But I just thought, I don't know why the thing came to my mind. And I told my wife, I said, you know what? I think I'm going to have to follow this. This question started to bug me about the Catholic Church. I'm going to have to follow it and find out more about it. And my wife agreed to it. I should have said perhaps earlier, my wife is a Chaldean Catholic by upbringing. So, she was, but by then she was also kind of had a journey of her own to out of the Catholic Church and then back to it in some ways. But then I took that question serious, and I started meeting Catholic priests in Eastbourne, and we spent a lot of time together. And among them was an ordinariate priest. And it became clearer and clearer that I no longer identify as an Anglican. I appreciate a lot about the Anglican Church, and there's some great things about it that has given me, and I still cherish. Hence, I became an ordinariate. But ultimately, it's not the Catholic Church. Ultimately, it's not in communion with the See of Peter, and whatever I was believing about, about the priesthood, about the Church. Anglicanism is not its natural habitat. Its natural habitat is the Catholic Church. And so therefore, if I'm honest to myself and to my people and to everyone else around me, I follow that to the conclusion that I need to become a Catholic. And that's exactly what I did in June of 2020, which was the Feast of St. Cyril of Alexandria. Okay, that's a long story, but I hope that makes sense.
That's a fantastic story, Timothy. I love that. Listeners are going to love listening to that. Thank you for telling us that in such good detail. There's so much to unpack there. So I want to go back a little bit to near the beginning of your journey and just think about the perilousness of you becoming Christian in the first place. I mean, not many of us would become Christian and then in an underground church, essentially, and then face these kinds of sometimes open persecutions. That alone is is pretty intense. So I mean, kudos for, I don't know, that teenage gall to do that. I don't know if you were daring or just stubborn being a teenager and just like, whatever, I'm just going to do this. But that's amazing. And then I think what's so fascinating for me to hear is this instinct that you had to look beyond the time period of the New Testament to, okay, what happened next? Right, that's a really interesting insight. I want to explore that for a minute, because I was in a Pentecostal church when I first became Evangelical Christian in high school. So I know I have deep roots in the Pentecostal church, and I know how they do history. I know that kind of idea of, well, really the biblical history ends when Acts is over, and then the church from there until now is kind of this murky darkness. We don't really know what happened. We didn't really care what happened because we're Christians now. We live kind of like we're the church in Acts, but you miss the whole interim, which we now know as Catholics is quite a bit in there. Yeah. So that instinct to know more of what happened in that time. I mean, you followed that instinct and began reading the early church fathers. What were you discovering as you read them? I mean, I think you've unpacked this a little bit for us. What I found too is these guys called bishops and the centrality of the Eucharist and these kinds of things. That I didn't discover that till many, many years later, a decade plus later, becoming an evangelical. What did you begin to find as you found those early church writings? I mean, looking at your faith as more of an evangelical, even as an evangelical kind of Anglican in the seminary, what did you begin to see? What was the major difference for you between what you were practicing and living as a Christian, and then finding these early church fathers and that picture of how Christianity looked early on? Does that question make sense in there somewhere?
Yeah, yes, it does. It does indeed. I suppose, as you know, evangelicalism has a strong emphasis on preaching, right? So the church gathering is about preaching. That's the sort of the big thing. We're going to preach the word. And I think, as I was reading the fathers more and more, I was thinking how beautiful and colorful the church is. It's not all bound by me sitting in a room and listening to someone for 40 minutes. But there is iconography, there is art, there is liturgy. Liturgy is just one big expression of, an artistic expression in some ways, if you like, of expressing God, communicating, and the senses, the use of the senses, my five senses, in worship. That I'm not just. It's not everything is in the heart between me and God, kind of a thing. And the church matters. The church matters. I'm not sort of, well, I'm going to church because that's what, there's this sort of sense that we go to church because that's what we all believe in, that, and that's what God wants us to do. But, as an evangelical, you believe, well, you were saved without the church. You don't, why would you need the church, sort of a thing. And also gradually grasping the idea, I'm still grasping that idea, but of the saints being alive and in our lives. That the church is not sort of a two-dimensional thing. There is at the Eucharist at Mass, that we are joined with the choir of heaven, with the saints, to the summit, to Mount Transfiguration, and there we're all surrounding Jesus and seeing this beatific vision. So I would say the church fathers, they added color, and I think this is another important thing about that I want to reflect back, that to me evangelicalism was sort of abstract in the air. It was like a bubble speech. It never sort of kind of lands. It's not grounded in things. But especially since I've become a Catholic, the church has practices that wants you to practice, and it's in these things that you find these things, the theology of the church, the belief of the church is actually grounded and starts to become tangible. It's not just, I believe in these things. I'm going to have endless arguments about who said what and whether it's right or wrong and all the rest of that. No, I am in sort of in communion with the saints. And that I don't know if that answers your question, but that basically is for me what the fathers brought. It's not just about preaching. As a matter of fact, preaching, I don't know, it's great, but it's make. I mean, when I was an Anglican, I understood that in a sense that when I was preaching in my Anglican evangelical church, and I was reading the fathers, it was always very difficult to land the point because there is no connection to anything else, to liturgy, to the Eucharist, to the stained glass windows and things like that. So you have to go through enormous pain to try and drive a point. But when I became a sort of more on the Anglo-Catholic side, I could just point and say, well, that's why we do this in the Eucharist. That's why we do this that's why the stained glass window says that. That's, so the preaching only actually started to make sense and become a proclamation, not just my thoughts, but it's a proclamation now because it's in the context of the liturgy. In fact, itself it becomes a liturgy, and together, then the road to Emmaus becomes complete. The breaking of bread. And so, as a matter of fact, Christ kind of opens the scriptures and shows them himself, and they see, oh yes, it's all there. But they still don't recognize, oh, this man who's explaining all these things to us is Jesus Christ himself. So now they kind of understood him in theories. They're in the book, they met him in the book, but not in person. But it's only at the breaking of bread it becomes complete. Like, oh my goodness, that was himself. That was Jesus himself. And then, the sad faces and the sad heart turns into joy. Let's run back to Jerusalem and then tell the disciples he's alive. So I think you see that's what the fathers, I suppose, brought to my life. And yes, as an Anglican, we had a glimpse of that, but I think Ratzinger changed my mind about it. So Yes. That's
I love it. We're getting a little mini homily here. I love this. That's
sorry. I
fantastic.
apologize.
No,
Yeah,
I
I
love it.
apologize.
I love it. And that is a fantastic way of explaining that, right? Because we would go as evangelicals, even as you're saying, as an evangelical Anglican in those contexts where a bit more of a low church experience. And the sermon is the thing, like the preaching is the center point, right? The pulpit or whatever is in the middle of the stage. That is the central thing. We met for a while in one of my churches that I last was in, a non-denominational church that I was deeply involved with, my wife and I, and we met in a Lutheran church. We'd have a service before theirs was, like we do our service and then they do theirs afterwards, kind of two congregations living in one building, and the Lutherans still had an altar there on there, right?
Yeah.
And we would put kind of the our pastor's little music stand with his notes on there in front of the altar, and he would and just symbolically, it's kind of fascinating to reflect on that idea that he was sitting in front of the altar, which should be the central point of the service, and the church fathers would have showed us that was the center point of the whole thing for those, right? The majority of Christianity. We put the preacher in front of that, and then the point is the sermon. But like you said in that fantastic example, Christ shows us that, but that leads on the road to Emmaus to the Eucharist. It points towards that, and there. The understanding is unlocked in the breaking of the bread, which we know it was a way of explaining what the Eucharist was. That was right.
Yes.
That was kind of the word. I love that picture. I think that's incredible.
Wonderful, isn't it? Yeah.
And I think too, you mentioned about Bible studies, and I think this too resonate with you. We did Bible studies as Pentecostals, as non-denominational evangelicals, in my experience. But we're sitting in a room arguing over verses of Scripture, right? Passages of Scripture. And we'd refer elsewhere in our Bible to kind of back up our understanding. But I think, as you found too, we're arguing with just the Bible. We're totally negating the 2,000 years of church history that's come before that. We didn't know it existed. Like we didn't know it was there. But you find the church fathers, I can remember I was in a Bible study near the end of my time as a Protestant Christian, and I had found the church fathers, and I brought a book of the church fathers to a Bible study, and we're unpacking, I think it was Romans or something, and I'm pulling out church fathers who've referred to these passages, saying, look at this, what this church father says. And I'm getting just blank stares around the room because people are going, well, who are the church fathers, and why does that person have the authority, or why should I listen to his point of view? He's not Brian McLaren or Dallas Willard or these people that we had read as evangelicals. It was just so foreign, right? But how silly is it to think of doing a Bible study and being cut off from the rest of church history? Right?
Yes, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy, and I suppose that idea of I become a judge over the Bible. I'm going to read, I'm going to learn the Greek and all the rest of that. And I must say, I got tired of that. I got just please, that just, and you were never sure because all that it does, it makes you cleverer and more argumentative, rather than thinking, well, I recently I've been, for the last 6 months, I've just been reading Origin of Alexandria, his commentaries. And, as I've been telling my wife, he drives me to prayer. Whenever I read him, I feel like, I want to pray now. He's not leading me to arguments, he's leading me to prayer. And I go to church, and as he explains, you need to face east and have your hands when you pray. And as you know, in the Catholic Church, when we say the Lord's Prayer, we raise our hands. I could see immediately the connection between, like, this is what these guys did, and the theology led to prayer, and loving God and worshiping Him, rather than I'm not saying these things doesn't exist in the evangelical church, like they're not worshiping God, but there's a great deal of, so what does the Bible actually say? That sometimes, or actually, a lot of time, it just sort of takes away from just being able to stand there in awe before God and say, this is just beautiful. This is amazing. I don't have things to say. I'm here just to, to gaze, to reflect, and offer worship, rather than,
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So you love the Book of Common Prayer. You love the Anglican tradition, but you begin to find it kind of wanting. And I know what you mean. I've had guests on the show, Father James Bradley from the Ordinary. I've had all these different guests who had these similar experiences. And I can think of my own kind of stopping over in the Anglican Church here in Canada. It's very similar to there in England, where you get these different sorts, and you get the idea that everyone, and I love how you put that you can't really find commonalities in a room full of Anglicans. You can't find something that we all agree on, because there's all these different views on those things. I mean, I can think of friends who are Anglican priests here in Canada who are very Anglo-Catholic, who would say, yes, the Eucharist is central. They can affirm the different Catholic dogmas on the Blessed Mother. They see these things as being valuable. They would find their patronage, or they'd kind of find their family tree is part of the Catholic Church. But then there's also Anglican friends that I have who are priests who are on the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, right? Who would say, no, those Catholics have it all backwards. They're doing it wrong. I mean, we'll do communion kind of once a month kind of thing. We'll call it communion. The very low view of the sacraments, low view of things like marriage and gender and sexuality, low view of the Bible. I have friends who have explained to me what it looks like going to an Anglican conference, and these resolutions are put forward and are voted on the Anglicans in the room, and the Bible isn't even mentioned in the resolution or in the arguments or the debates, right? And the guy who stands up and says, look, shouldn't we give the Bible more credence here on this subject, or give the tradition of the church more credence on this subject? And they're kind of the minority, the one person in a room of thousands who are saying this, right? So it was, for me, kind of a microcosm of the larger Protestant movement. I mean, what I was hoping for in the Anglican Church as I was looking into it before becoming Catholic was this holding on to tradition, how the church was for 2,000 years. What I found was just a mini Protestantism, where there's all different ways of being Anglican, as there are in being evangelical or Lutheran. There was no grounding in an authority, even in the Bible, right? There was no. So was that kind of the sense that you got as you were, and that you mentioned tension too, right? Tension is the word that I would feel is what's going to rip me to shreds, trying to stay Anglican if you are traditionally minded, right?
Yes. I suppose there are a number of things that I think it's worth commenting on. I think one of them, in the churches I've been to, and I've been to many churches, and I've also been a priest in some of them, Anglican priest in some of them. And as I said earlier, that people see they call it the church service, okay? And service could be anything, could be a number of things. It's not one thing. So people, they wake up and they come to church, they come to a service. Some expect it to be high mass, and some expect it to be more sort of a low evangelical type of thing. And even in those, at least in my experience, those who subscribe to Catholic sort of ecclesiology, that's usually the clergy and maybe a few people. But within it, you find a great deal of difference, and there's always unhappiness, and there's always arguments to why people not coming to church, why are not winning more people to Christ, because we are more Eucharistic, or because we do it this way, and it's endless. It's as a vicar, I remember just getting tired of all these things. And then when I became a Catholic, and even before that, but it became more home to me when I became a Catholic. I woke up and went to my wife, and I saw everyone just quietly, either kneeling or just sitting quietly before Mass started. And I said to my wife, I said, well, I think here is the thing, that these guys wake up in the morning and they say we're going to Mass. They are not saying we're going to a service. It's quite clear what they're expecting. We're going to church, and it's going to be Mass. And I don't have a say much about what's that going to look like, or what do I think it should look like, and all the rest of that. Now, I know, of course, there's a bit of sort of flexibility, but you will for sure, when you go to church on Sunday, you will find Mass in a Catholic church, right? And that just brought an enormous peace, that I'm no longer going to church to argue what's the right way of worshiping God. I'm going simply to worship God. The other thing I would say, which again touched me very, very much. Before becoming a Catholic, whenever I was on holiday, because on Sundays as an Anglican priest, you were obviously in church. So, but when I was on holiday, I always used to look for the closest Catholic church and try and attend there. And I noticed that there were children in there, right? And I think up to now, I could say, if not all, most Catholic services that masses that I've been to, that you will also see some children kneeling with their parents, right? Now, in the Anglican Church here, the great argument was that we're losing our children. We're not getting them into church, and there are hundreds of programs and arguments as to why and how. Why are we losing it, and how can we bring them back? And most of the solutions, it's not getting them to mass or to church. It's always some kind of either make church some kind of a Sunday school assembly. I don't know if you understand Sunday school assembly, but or make it so family friendly and so water it down so children could come. Or there's obviously the good old Sunday school, but it's endless argument about how do we bring. And I went to the Catholic Church. And I think like, yeah, but these guys also are British, or at least they live in this country. They face similar problems because usually in the Anglican Church the arguments are, well, the kids now go to football on Sunday and what have you. I was thinking, but why are these guys bringing their children to church? Why are they kneeling? It's just sort of intrigued me that the children, I would say, it was one of the greatest arguments. This sort of felt like no matter how clever I could become, when I can come and see parents kneeling beside their children, then that's it. I'm sorry. Like, look, these guys have managed to do it. Their children are with them and they're coming to church and they're worshiping God. So both things that, what do we expect when we go to church? And that because it's Mass, people can bring their children. That sort of had a huge impact on me. I suppose the other thing, I think I'm probably diverting from your question here now, but coming back to coming to Ratzinger, because I started reading him quite a lot, and especially his book on the liturgy, which I can't remember what's the title now, but he has it's a well-known, I think one of his most well-known books. He just talks about what's the liturgy basically, and I think in there he starts talking about that liturgy should bear on my moral life. It makes a requirement of my moral life. It's not just something like, oh, isn't that beautiful? It touches me, but has no bearing on how I live as a Christian and what I do, and no questions are asked. And that was for me like, yes, I mean, we do beautiful liturgy in the Anglican Church, and there are fantastic priests that they are amazing and they're trying to live the Christian life and all the rest of that. But Anglican liturgy by now, and after all the movements and what has happened to it, it could be so beautiful, but doesn't really sort of make a requirement on you as to how to live as a Christian. I thought, there's something not right there. So no. Every Anglican or people who live in this country will acknowledge that. Let's say comes Christmas, everyone rushes to the beautiful, King's College type of Christmas carols and all the rest of that, and they love this wonderful sort of hymns that are full of wonderful theology, but that's it. Once they leave the door, it sort of stays there. So I think the other thing for me was like, if the church and its liturgy doesn't touch my moral life, my Christian walk, and my discipleship, then I'm afraid there's something not right. So that was another element that kind of sort of pushed me. But you mentioned also, I'm just going to finish with this and let you speak again. But you mentioned the Book of Common Prayer. I suppose that there are beautiful elements there, and the fact that they are beautiful and they, because they do belong to the Catholic Church. What do I mean by that? Is that when the Reformation happened and Cranmer here and the Anglican Church started to put the Book of Common Prayer together, it was them by and large, not in everything, but by and large drawing from the resources they knew of and they already had, and it was practiced in this country and as a Catholic country. And so I love the fact that, let's say, as an ordinariate, when I was as an Anglican, I was doing the same. That I read the Book of Psalms once a month as part of my prayer life, for example. I love the rigorous reading of Scripture in there, and some of these beautiful traditional Catholic prayers that's been retained. So these are the elements that I appreciate. But when I was an Anglican, the Book of Common Prayer is gathering dust on the shelf. For some, it's just sort of it's a historical artifact. Now, of course, the Book of Common Prayer's theology of the Eucharist is very Protestant. So that's something that I wasn't happy with. So there are all these little elements and dilemmas that eventually I think it sort of pushed me towards the Catholic Church. And I'll stop now.
No, that's fantastic. And I want to just revisit the idea of that tension, because for me, the idea of this idea that the liturgy should be rigorous and should be rooted in this, for Anglicans, this Book of Common Prayer that you say is gathering dust, how that exists in one part of the church, but not another part of the church. That for me creates this kind of tension that would say, maybe you could elaborate on this, that would to me say, like, I can't remain in this church that one side sees the need for a rigorous liturgy and the importance of that, but the other side of this, the spectrum, allows same people in that church to just kind of do what they want. How could this be the church that Christ intends? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely, and I think this is I think another important point. I'm sort of, as I said, there was lots of reasons that was leading me to the Catholic Church, and these are things that I had to wrestle with as I was considering it. Is that when I used to go on holiday abroad, right? I can't go and receive Mass. There are either no Anglican churches, or if there are, then as a traditionalist Anglican that believe that priesthood is reserved to the male members of the humankind, and of course female are the church, so they are by no means second class, and it doesn't mean woman doesn't have ministry. But I had a traditional I have a traditional understanding of that I couldn't really actually go to an Anglican church and receive communion. And the Anglican Church was so fragmented. So, even here now, when I was a traditionalist Anglican, we have our own supervision as to, sort of kind of keep us, if you like, intact and all the rest of that. So, and somehow there's a division. That's one obvious division, but there are so many. There's the Evangelical Catholic division. There is the High Low Church division, which obviously, it's the same as the Evangelical and the Catholic. But then there's the traditionalist versus the modernist, and this is not like the Catholic Church in the sense that we could have all these arguments, we could disagree on things, we could have different views about this and that, but we're not going to argue about Mass on Sunday. We're not going to go and say, well, I don't think I'll receive Eucharist from this priest. So that element of unity of John 17, Jesus praying for his church to be one. And for me, I'm now reunited, not just to Catholics, in this country, but Catholics of my wife's family in Iraq, for example. I could go anywhere in the world and enter a Catholic church, whatever language they speak, whoever they are, and receive communion. Not that Anglicans don't have that diversity, but they don't have that unity of reception. That unity of reception is missing, is lost. What does it even mean? What does unity mean? Coexistence? Do we just sort of coexist and do a few things together and be nice to each other? I don't think that's what Jesus called us to.
Yeah, and I think it was Father James Bradley on this program talking about his journey. It could be someone, I could be mistaken. It could be somebody else I had on here, but they had said that they would go to a certain bishop in the Anglican Church because they knew that he had maybe the most valid orders out of other bishops, or they'd avoid certain other parishes, like you say, because they'd have more modern tendencies or more modern views, and these things were changing, like the women's ordination and then women's ordination as bishops. Like these things were changing largely in spite of protests to look at the scriptures and to hold fast to the tradition of the church, and with warning signs, right, of this fracturing unity. Like, don't like, let's wait and read and study more about this before we do this, because it's going to fracture the church apart. I mean, you saw this, and you're describing this kind of firsthand, right? This idea that the tension of being an Anglican in the Anglican church, never mind an Anglican priest, is you are trying to walk a line that is getting, I think, smaller and smaller, or thinner and thinner, more difficult, and find the parishes that hold to the traditional Christian faith. Find the parishes that have the rigorous teaching that underpinned Anglicanism since the Reformation, but is quickly flowing away. I just think of those. I think of those listeners or viewers of this program, and I get these letters all the time from these Episcopal priests, these Anglican priests, these Anglo-Catholic listeners, who are walking in this tension and are finding it harder and harder to do, because you really are. It's a form of Protestantism where you're kind of picking and choosing which churches you go to, right, and who you listen to.
Yes.
Ultimately, right.
And you haven't got the choice. And I suppose one of the dilemmas I faced as a priest is that, the Anglican Church, you can marry divorcees, right? But they also recognize that, the traditional view of the church is not, the church doesn't marry divorcees. So that's left to you as a priest to make that decision. So you become your own pope and bishop, you make that decision. Now, that sounds very easy. Like, okay, I'm going to just, I have a policy. I mean, mine was like, I don't just marry divorcees. It's as simple as that, But then my people, and I've had this, they tell me, well, but Bishop such and such is remarried, and the priest down the road does this, and then suddenly you feel like, so there isn't, as I used to view it about the Catholic Church, and I know now it's true. Catholic priests could say, well, it's not down to me. It's there's a teaching, there's a magisterium. I'm afraid, as much as I might wish to help you, I'm afraid I can't. But in the Anglican Church, the onus are on you. It's you who making my life miserable. You who's not going to let me marry and all that. And so you find that you actually are, in the line of fire all the time for not sort of letting us be the sort of Christians we want to be. Just because you have some views about some, old men lived I don't know how many centuries ago, and who cares about them, sort of a thing. So I'm caricaturing, I'm simplifying things. But these were real tensions, and the Church of England around you, even if you sort of managed to say, I'm going to get my parish, to be true to historical Christianity, at least as I understand it, the Anglican Church around you is moving all the time, and moving fast, and having policies, and having strategies as to how to get more people into the church, and how to change this, how to change that, and you just can't catch up with it. And I personally sort of felt tired, and you can't really protect your people from that, because they are, in the Church of England, I suppose this is more of a strength rather than a weakness. They are aware of what's happening in the wider church, but the wider church is having new initiatives all the time, and whilst you were just trying to say, look, guys, if we just come to church, do morning and evening prayer, if we do mass and try and live our Christian life and be true to Jesus, quietly, and not shy away from our faith in our workplaces, and the way we deal with our neighbors, then the church will be sustained, it will grow, and all that. But when people don't have actually faith in that, and in their own Christian calling and identity, their identity is in crisis. That's I suppose that's sort of the sort of, if the way to put it. It's that Anglican identity from the Reformation has been in crisis. There is an Anglican identity. In fact, Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, he has a book called Anglican Identities with an S at the end. So there are identities in conflict all the time. So how will this church then come up? And here, I'm not talking about some policy about this and that, but this is now touching, and has been touching, the core values of the Christian life and Christian doctrine and faith. And yes, there's always, let's say, the remnant who will believe and be true and all the rest of that. But I suppose I kind of and I know some former colleagues of mine, I suppose they see themselves as martyrs. They're going to be martyred in this, for the cause of Christ. I saw that, no, my calling is not to argue with my congregation all the time, sort of a thing. My calling is that, and argue with the hierarchy and the church that is sort of managing me, not just sort of the laity, but also those who are above me. No, my calling is that there is something the church has agreed on it theologically. I know the theology and the core values and all the rest of that. And my job as a priest is to take them from, walk alongside them, because I myself am a disciple. Walk alongside them from where I am, from the sinful humanity to becoming a saint. That's my calling as a priest. Not all these other things, which is exciting. It makes Twitter so fun and all the rest of that. But that's not my calling as a priest. Yeah.
Oh boy, yeah. I mean, what you said there too about protecting your congregation is so fascinating to me, because of course if you might be a more traditional minded Anglican priest, you might be trying to live out the Book of Common Prayer and the things that the church has taught for since the beginning, despite the Reformation. But if the church as a whole is moving away from those things, how hard it is for you as a priest to kind of lead and guide your flock, as it were, when the rest of the church is kind of separating from what you see as the core of Christianity. That sounds like a terrible tension to live in, and
Absolutely.
more and more difficult. And I think too this is what I think so many converts try and express. I do too, and I showed a number of times, the idea that, okay, so you become Catholic and now you can say the church believes this. You don't just say, I believe this, and the Anglican Church believes all these kinds of things, the identities. No, there is a Catholic identity that's grounded in the Catechism, in the teaching of the Church, which goes back to 2,000 years. That's such a distinct difference, I think, that should be underscored so many times. That
Absolutely.
right.
Absolutely.
And this drove me. I mean, I would read in Matthew where Jesus talks about how to settle disputes amongst believers. Right. He says, "Bring one more, then bring two, and then bring it to the church." Right. Well, I brought that verse to my non-denominational evangelical pastor. I said, well, what is the church? Because if we disagree here on these things, I bring this to you, and you say, no, you guys are wrong. This is what we believe as Christians. I can go down the street quite literally to a church that believes what I believe. And so what is the church if there's no final stopping point that says, okay, you're in or you're out in this case, right? And the Anglican Church, I think you'd agree, doesn't have a better answer for that, because there are so many different answers in the Anglican Church. But the Catholic Church says, no, this is what we believe, right? Yes. So I could bring, like you said, and there are Catholics and Catholic priests across the spectrum that may have different views on things, but ultimately there's that stopping point where it says, no, this has been authoritatively decided upon. This is what the church believes. Here it is. Whether you believe it or not, here's what we believe, right?
It is what it is, yeah.
That is such a major difference for me in Anglican versus Catholic, and in Protestant in general versus becoming Catholic, and even in Orthodoxy versus Catholicism. There's a stopping point in the Catholic Church where you're in or you're out based on what the Church says, not what you say, right?
Yes, and I think 2 points actually, if I may. The first, and recently I've been sort of reflecting on this as I've been reading Pope Benedict more and more, versus so many other great people that I've read, Anglicans and others in the past. I was telling this to my wife. There is always, as though when I was reading these great Anglicans and others, other non-Anglican and also non-Catholic, is that as though there's also an argument that God's working on the fringes. God's always on the border. He's sort of not happy with the church, and he's working from there. Prophetic voices coming from that. That's really where God is and all that. And that is sort of not very tangible. It's always you're running after it, trying to catch it. Am I there? Am I not there? And all the rest of that. But what I've learned from Ratzinger is that he speaks from within the church, comfortably, from the heart and center of the church. This is a church teaching. God's going to be here. And these are the precepts that the church have laid down. These are the beliefs. These are the practices. You do them and see where you're going to be with Jesus. You're going to be, a happy, satisfied Christian, if you want. So I loved the fact that the Catholic Church is saying, well, you could point to all sorts of mistakes popes have done and all the rest of that, but the Church's teaching is the Church's teaching. You hold on to it, you practice it, you be a good Catholic and see what happens, And I can tell you, I've only been a Catholic for a year. I'm much happier, much satisfied as a Christian than I've ever been in my life as a Christian. So I think that's the first point I want to make. The second point, which I think is also important, is that obviously there are, and I say this in love, there are lots of Catholic voices in US, sometimes here and other parts of the world, and they well, at least that's how they see themselves. They speak for the Catholic Church, and I think, I mean, I don't think they speak for the Catholic Church, but that's how they sort of view themselves. And I had to tell some people that, no, by becoming a Catholic, no disrespect to anyone here, I didn't become an American, I didn't become an Irish, I became a Catholic, all right? And, that I think is important, is that what, lots of people are hearing things from people who are Catholic, and but that's their view. That's a wonderful thing in the Catholic Church. You could say such and such have priest or bishop or whatever. Yes, that's their view. They can't immediately tell you this is what the Church teaches. I mean, if they're going to be honest about it. Well, in the Anglican Church, you can say, well, yes, some Anglicans believe that, and some others believe that, and for a time, it sounds like this is so beautiful and liberating. I could just, try and follow my own conscience and believe anything. But then suddenly you find like, well, but I'm in conflict. There's all these conflicts around me. Where in the Catholic Church there's this sort of restfulness. This is what the Church believes, and the wonderful sort of advice and prayer of St. Anselm of Canterbury, I think it is that how does it go? Is it I believe in order to understand, I think, or something along these lines. I believe, I accept what the Church is saying, even if I'm struggling with it. I believe it, I accept it, and I know in time, I'm going to not just say, oh well, that makes sense, but rejoice in it. Rejoice in the truth that the Church brings. That, I think, is what the Catholic Church is giving me.
That's so well said. And the word restfulness, I love that. I mean, I've been struggling for a long time, blogging for, 6-7 years, podcasting for a number of years now. I have so many guests who articulate this, and I try really hard to also articulate the idea that you can rest in the Catholic Church. You don't have to figure out your theology on every single point and be arguing constantly about how you should interpret this or that. I mean, this as an Anglican priest, you face this tension you said before in great detail with people in your congregation, what they believe, right? But you can say, no, the Catholic Church believes this, and it's right here, and you can hear these talking heads. I mean, I'm a talking head. You can check what I say against the Catechism, what the Catholic Church actually says it believes, right? I can say all kinds of things, and they're out there, and podcasts and YouTube, and people write these things, but you have this source to check, which the Church says is protected by the Holy Spirit from error. And you don't have to. I mean, I left Evangelical Church that I was a part of as they were wrestling with the idea of marrying same-sex couples and gender identity. I left that church in the midst of that, and we were essentially just pulling out different verses of scripture and different theologians that we liked and bashing them together to figure out who we thought had the best angle. That's how we did theology. We thought it was right. We were so angsty and we were so uptight and struggled. And I know our pastor lost sleep. He lost weight. He struggled, and the church eventually split apart after we left on this issue. Right. The Catholic Church can argue about these things within the Catholic Church, but we have the Catechism, which says we believe this, right? I think restfulness is such a good word, because it's so different, isn't it? That experience of doing theology, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think here's the point: is that of course I'm not saying that people shouldn't do YouTube. I'm actually now, have agreed to be on a YouTube channel and all that. So I think it's the Catholic Church, of course, encourages us thinking and delving into things and see the logic of it. But I suppose the Catholic Church has been thinking for over 2,000 years, and there's a lot of richness there, and that we kind of need to draw from all that to kind of understand any given issue. And I think the sort of work you do and many others do, we need to engage and be able to articulate that faith. So, for example, one of the things I used to be used to put me off a little bit when I was trying to become a Catholic is Catholics telling me, "Well, the Catholic Church is right." Well, you know, no, we need to talk about the issue. We need to talk about the issue. You need to explain to me why the Catholic Church is right on this. Why is the belief in, the Blessed Mother, the Holy Mother is this rather than that? Why do we believe this about the Pope? These things need to be laid out, not necessarily sort of argued, but discussed. This is how I see it. This is how the church sees it. This is why we believe in this, and sort of understand and respect the objections that the modern world and other Christians sort of bring, and sort of respectfully sort of engage with that. So what you guys are doing, what you're doing here, it's amazing. What many others are doing, it's amazing. But let's remember all the time that this is a church of 2,000 years, and as you said, that I don't have to work out everything now with you in this interview for people. I'm resting. I'm speaking from a vantage point of being restful. I'm going to explain to you what I can, and there are all sorts of things that I don't have to necessarily get my head around it and understand it and argue it. Just believe that I am in the hand of the saints, and the saints, gonna carry me there in their prayers, and hopefully, please God, that in time I will join that great choir. Please God, I think that will take some time, but you know what I mean.
Oh, fantastic. That's a great place to close up this conversation. I've had such a great time talking to you. I know that listeners will be absolutely edified to hear this story. It's a fantastic one. And normally I ask my guests where they want to point people towards to read their books or see their videos or the lectures or something. How could people follow you? I mean, because they're going to want to know more about you.
Well, right. I'm afraid I haven't got a book or things like that. But I'm hoping, if God makes that possible, I'm hoping that in future that I do a PhD and all that. But I'm not there. I haven't got a book yet and all the rest of that. But I am on Twitter, as you know, and follow me. I usually follow people back. And I am going to go to starting seminary this coming September. So pray for me. I'm really eager and really looking forward to it. My inbox, my DM on Twitter is open. If anyone gets in touch and have a question about my journey, I'm not an expert on the Catholic Church. I'm learning a lot. There's a lot that I don't know. There's lots of jargon that I'm still getting my head around as to how these things work and all the rest. So I'm no expert on the Catholic Church or anything. I can just only tell you about my journey and why I think my decision of becoming a Catholic was the right one. So Twitter is the place to get in touch.
That's fantastic. And I'll put a link to your Twitter profile in the show notes. And we'll have you back again, Lord willing, when we can call you Father, which will be an amazing journey. Lord willing, that's fantastic. Timothy, thank you so much for joining me this week. I can't say it enough. I've been looking forward to this for a while, and really it's exceeded my expectations. So thank you. I want to say God bless you. God bless the work you've done for the church and are doing for the church, and in the future will continue to do. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise.